Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Whenever you are viewing this, hello. My name is Savannah Playford. I am the Director of Youth Ministry at Dixon United Methodist Church, and I hope all is well with each of you. Today's daily devotion is going to be a little bit different than most. Instead of focusing on a specific passage, I want to talk to you about a specific person in the Bible. It currently feels like the whole world is quarantined, in isolation, and at home bound. But is there anybody in the Bible who experienced the same thing that we might be able to relate to? As a young person, the text of the Bible is often hard to relate to because it seems like it was written a billion years ago. But if you are able to relate to a person and connect to a person in the Bible, it might become more appealing to you. Today I want to talk to you about Paul. Paul, his name was originally Saul, and Saul persecuted Christians and imprisoned them, had an epiphany, and changed his name to Paul, and then went on to spread the good news of the gospel. Although the Apostle Paul did really great things, unfortunately, he spent a lot of his time imprisoned or housebound. Although Paul was not on house arrest or home because of a pandemic and fear of spreading the virus, he was on house arrest, however, though, because he was spreading the contagious good news of the gospel. Unlike most of us, watching Netflix, sitting at home, going on the internet was not an option for Paul. So what Paul instead did with his time was he wrote a lot of letters. He wrote the letters to different friends or different people who needed his help. One of the people that he wrote to during his time was Timothy. And when he wrote to Timothy, he had three main things he wanted to tell Timothy. Number one, Timothy, I want you to know that God's grace equals strength. Paul was not telling Timothy that he can get his strength from Facebook or from the gym, but Paul himself knew what it was like to struggle and needs God's strength. So he told Timothy, look to the Bible, look in the scriptures, find God's strength. Number two, Paul said, God's plan is still to make disciples. Although at this time when everyone is homebound, it may seem like God does not have a plan and we cannot disciple other people, bring them to church, share these things with them. We can. Unlike in Paul's day, we have so many more resources. God's plan is still, even amongst this pandemic, to make more disciples. So I encourage each of you to share these videos with not only everybody on your feed, but maybe a few specific people who you know could benefit. And number three, Paul told Timothy, God's word is not bound and has no limits, even when Paul, or people like us who are quarantined, do have limits. As I just mentioned, we have so many more resources than Paul or Timothy or anybody else in the Bible did because we have technology. So I highly encourage all of you to use that technology and not to feel bound. Share a Bible verse with one another. Share these videos with one another. Hop on Zoom or onto a FaceTime call and share the good news of the gospel with somebody, or maybe even share a cup of coffee. Although Paul went through a lot of crazy things and was on house arrest, and many of us feel like we are losing our mind during this quarantine, I just wanted to share with each of you that although it's hard to connect to a passage of the Bible, it should be very easy for all of us to connect with Paul of the Bible. So this week in your journals, I highly recommend that you write a small little note or a couple words of strength and send that letter the good old-fashioned way to somebody who may need to hear it this week. I hope all is well with each of you, and I can't wait to see you soon. Not only like Paul said, but I am reminding you that God's grace equals strength. God's plan is to make more disciples, and God's word is not bound and has no limits, even when some of us are at